In the lesson today, in the first lesson today, I would like to do some more advanced entity framework concepts. We will recap the basics of creating an entity framework project again. I know I'm boring you to death with this topic, but it's so important that we will do it again today so that we make sure that you really understood it. However, I try to bring in something new. Today we will use SQLite instead of SQL Server. Hopefully that will be interesting. That is especially interesting because when you do mobile development on Android and iOS, you always have SQLite available, probably no SQL Server. So it absolutely makes sense in the context of mobile computing to use SQLite as a database. So the first thing that we'll do is we will, again, create a new project, a console project, and add an entity framework model, data context, and so on. But don't worry, we will add some more advanced concepts today. It will not be just hello world. So please get started by creating a brand new console app. Just start your Visual Studio, select .NET Core console app, and create a brand new fresh console app. I will call it Advanced EF Core, and I ask you to use the same project name as I do here, because then it's easier to copy in some code that I prepared for you. Good. You can use either .NET Core 3.0 or you can use .NET Core 3.1, the preview. I will use the latest and greatest preview. I installed it yesterday in the evening, so I will use the latest preview, but if you want to stick to the production version, that's perfectly fine too. So in my case, it will say here .NET Core 3.1. In your case, it should say either .NET Core 3.0 or .NET Core 3.1. Good. Shouldn't be any problem. The first thing that we always do, let's quickly recap the process. What do we have to do if we want to add entity framework to our .NET Core project? First, it was a rhetorical question. First, Nougat Packages. Create the model, create the data context, add the migrations, do the database update. Nougat, model, context, migrations, database update. And if you can't remember that, take a look at the GitHub cheat sheet. Remember, I created you a cheat sheet here in HTL C# Entity Framework. Here you have this cheat sheet. Might be a lifesaver in your exam. And here you start with the Nougat Packages. Okay? But as I promised you, today we are not going to use SQL Server, but we are going to explore SQLite. So copy Microsoft Entity Framework Core, right-click on the project, manage Nougat Packages, and this time we are going for SQLite. Now, what is SQLite compared to SQL Server? SQLite is a very lightweight, as the name suggests, a very lightweight version of a SQL database. It doesn't require any kind of server. All you need to do is you add the Nougat package and the data will be stored locally in a file. Okay, I've lost internet connectivity. Yeah? What a surprise. Hopefully it will come back in a second. Did you lose internet connectivity too? Okay. Yeah, I think we are back. It was just no. Here, let's try it again. Reconnect to the network. Okay, don't worry. We will postpone installing the Nougat packages. We can start with the model. That's perfectly fine. For the model, I do not want you to type everything. Please navigate in my GitHub repository Oh, you can't navigate in the GitHub repository because we don't have internet. Okay. That's not good. Let's see. I can do the following. I can take that one, and put, yep.
I do have internet, and some of us also.
Yeah, you do?
Yes.
Yeah, it just came back. I think we are lucky. Let's see. Yes, it was only a short glitch. Okay, we are fine. So let's get back to the Nougat packages. Manage Nougat packages, Microsoft.entityframework.SQLite. This is what we need. As I said, no server, no installation of any fancy Windows services or something like this. It's just a file and it will be stored locally. And the good thing is, as I mentioned before, SQLite is available on all mobile platforms, so this code will also work on Android, on iOS, and many other platforms. Good. Please remember, as we discussed before, if you're using .NET Core 3.0, use this version of the Nougat packages. If you use the latest version of the preview, use some of these packages. It depends. Let's install it. Let's accept it. Looks good. And the second package that we always need, if we take a look at the cheat sheet, it's the design package. Always install Entity Framework Core Design. So these steps will always be necessary when it comes to your exam or the Matura. You will probably have to install 2 Nougat packages, at least 2 Nougat packages for Entity Framework. Good? Fine? Did it work? Good. Now, in my GitHub repository, please go to this folder, and there you will find a file which is called modal.cs. Please copy it into your solution. So what you essentially do is you create a class, add class, which is called modal, and then you simply open it up in GitHub. You can also clone the whole repository, it's up to you, and then copy all the classes which are in this file. You probably have to add a bunch of using statements, or just one using statement, and then we are fine. You should have 4 classes. You should have genre, book, author, and book author. Please make sure that you copy this in and that you don't get any errors. Your program should still compile. Does it work? Yes? Anybody need support? No? Good. Good. Now the first few tables here, genre, book, entities. Genre, book, and author, nothing special. We have a genre which has an ID, primary key, a title, and one genre can have multiple books. A genre could be drama, thriller, horror, children, whatever. Then we have books. A book has a title, a number, the assigned genre, a language, and authors. Please note that one book can have multiple authors. We will talk about that in a second. An author has a name, a nationality, and a list of books. So each author can create multiple books. So what we have here between books and authors is a so-called many-to-many relationship. So in an ER diagram, we would have something like this, many-to-many, M-N. Can you remember from your database courses what many-to-many means? Okay. And this is the new thing that I would like to dive into a little bit more in detail in this lecture, because in this lecture we have to create such a many-to-many relationship. I have used some ASCII here to visualize the many-to-many relationship. One book can have multiple authors. One author can have multiple books. And what you need in entity framework to model that is you need to have an entity in the middle. So you need to create a separate entity, and in my case I called it book author, because it connects a book to one of its authors. Understand? In previous versions of entity framework, in old versions, this wasn't necessary. You could create it, but it wasn't necessary. But now, in Entity Framework Core, they decided that it is a good idea to explicitly create these entities. Good? Now, if we take a look at book author, it just contains a reference to the book and a reference to the author. I also created this entity very specifically like that, because if you take a close look, this table, this entity, and it will at the end of the day become a table in the relational database, does not have a single field primary key. So I did not, please do not follow along because I will delete this code again, I did not create something like book author ID. I didn't do that. We don't have a single column primary key in this table. This is something new. We haven't talked about that. I mentioned that it is possible, but we haven't done it yet. What is the primary key of this table? Well, the primary key of this table is book plus author. The combination of book and author is the primary key. So we will have to talk about it, how we can model something like this in Entity Framework. Good? Good. Nice. So, next step. Let's create the data context. Nougat, model, data context, migrations, database update. 5 steps. Add class. Let's call it the book author data context. Let me quickly check if that name is correct. Please wait for a second. No, I just called it book data context. Please call it book data context, because then you can copy in some code later on. Let's check out the cheat sheet again. Or not. We'll know it by heart. The base class of every database context is DB context from Entity Framework. So always derive your data context from DB context. It's part of the cheat sheet, so you don't need to write that down. And then we need a DB set property for every table. It's also part of the cheat sheet. So do the following: DB set book books. So we have 4 tables in our case. 1, 2, 3, 4. Book, author, genre, and book author. Books, authors, plural, genres, plural, and book authors. See it? These 4 DB set properties reflect our tables in the database. So every of these properties, each of these properties becomes a database table in our SQLite database. So far, nothing special. You should have done that by now multiple times, so this is just a repetition. From now on, we will learn some new elements here. Everybody okay? Any support necessary? Good. Now we need to override 2 methods, and we'll start by onConfiguring. You saw how I did it? You just write override, and then you say on, and then you just hit enter to get the onConfiguring method. I hope you can remember. If not, I will refresh your mind. In ASP.NET Core, you specify the type of database connection in the startup class. But here we have a console app. Therefore, we don't have a startup class. Therefore, we specify the database connection string here in onConfiguring. There are other more advanced scenarios, so-called generic hosts and so on, but we will not cover that in that course. If you become a professional .NET Core developer, you will probably look back and say, oh my God, what did I do? But for now, it's perfectly fine to override the onConfiguring method and do the following. Options builder dot use SQLite. The beauty of SQLite is that you don't need any kind of server. SQLite works perfectly fine just locally. Okay? It stores the data in a local file and it works on iOS, on Android, on Windows, on Linux, wherever you want. The SQLite driver is supported directly by Microsoft. So this is not a community stuff that some community members maintain. This is maintained by Microsoft and you get full support if you use it in a professional project. So SQLite is really a good option. By the way, there is even a JavaScript version of SQLite. So you can use SQLite also in the browser if you're programming with JavaScript. You could if you want. Not a lot of people do it, but it is possible. Use SQLite. Here, in the middle, in the connection string, you just say data source equals to mydb.db, something like this. It's just a file, okay? No server, no user, no password, just a file. However, if we just specify the file, it is a big mess. Why? Because it always will be a local file. So we need to somehow specify the folder in which the file should be. If you want to make it very, very simple, you can just specify the folder here, something like this. But I would like to do it a little bit more professionally if you want. I would like to find out the folder in which my application is currently running, where it is installed. Get the idea? So I would like to show you that so that you just learn a little bit new things. The first thing that you do for that is, in this line, you say assembly. Do you know what an assembly is? Ever heard the term assembly? Maybe heard, but never really understood what it is. Assembly just means a DLL or an executable. Why is it called assembly? Why don't they call it just DLL or executable? Well, in former times, when I was young, and you were probably not even alive, no, that's too much, but you were a baby. Yeah? When I was young, assemblies could consist of multiple files. So you could split up a DLL into multiple files because we had things which are called floppy disks. I don't know if you can remember that. And sometimes these things were too large and therefore you could split it up. Today that isn't the thing anymore. So assembly in your mind just translated into DLL or executable. Okay? So assembly.getExecutingAssembly, that's the currently executing DLL or executable. And this has a property which is called location. It will give you the full path to the executable or DLL that is currently running. Now we don't want the name of the executable, we only want to have the folder, and for that there is a helper class which is called path. Get directory name. This will extract the directory name from the file, from the executable or the DLL. And then we can use another method of path, path.combine, to append mydb.db. And this will now give us folder of the executable / mydb.db. Get it? Let's save that in a variable and use it here instead of the data source. Okay, let me do it like that. Give me a second, and so, and so, and good. This will now make the path to the mydb.db file flexible. It will always execute with the database that is stored locally in the same folder as the executable or DLL that we are currently running. Got it? Do you see the value of this SQLite stuff? It's not for multi-user, big server, the whole company accesses a common server. It's really a small thing. Imagine that you have to write a mobile app that is capable of running in an offline mode, where you don't have a connection to the internet or to a company network, and you still want to store some data. Then SQLite is a really good option. Good? Anybody need support? Does it still compile? No errors? Awesome. Next step. We need to overwrite the second method on modal creating. I mentioned this method multiple times, but we never really talked about it in more details. So today, it's the first time that we really make use of this method, and we must make use of this method. Let's start with the simple things. If you take a look at the modal, in the book, we have something which is called ISBN. Every book that you sell on Amazon or any kind of bookstore has to have an ISBN. International, whatever book number, I don't know the abbreviation. But it is a unique number. So what I want in this case, I want to have a unique index on this ISBN. How do I do that? Well, here in the on modal creating, I can do the following code. I will write it down, you can follow along, and I think I don't need to describe it any more in details because you will immediately recognize it. Modal builder dot entity book dot, and then I can say has index book dot ISBN is unique. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? You just say which entity, which column, is it unique or is it not unique? Now the system makes sure, SQLite will make sure that you cannot insert multiple books with the same ISBN. If you try that, you will get an error. Make sense? Yeah? You have the whole exercise in my GitHub repository, so you now have a kind of template. Whenever you need to create a unique index for homework, exam, or Matura, take a look at this example, and you probably will be fine. Next one. The genre title. I think the genre title should also be a unique index. No problem, so let's copy these 3 lines, edit again, and this time I'm going to go for genre has index, but this time it's the genre title. Should look like that. And then we are fine. We have both unique indexes. Now let me show you something where you do not need to follow along. Please don't write the code that I will write now because I will delete the code again. It's just for demonstration purposes. I can write something like this. Modal builder dot, let's say author, entity, author, exactly, property, author name, required. Now, if you take a look, this code is exactly the same as this attribute. You can use both ways. It's really up to you to decide whether you want to go for the left way or the right way. It makes no difference. The result will always be the same. Some people prefer to have the entire database properties in one place. They want to just take a look at the on-modal creating function and to immediately see, okay, what is required, where do I have my keys, what are the max lengths, and so on. They prefer having everything in one place. Other people say, I don't want to write so much code if I just can add an attribute like that. That's much more simple. So they go for the left version. It's really up to you. It's a matter of choice. Decide and go for whatever option you prefer. Good? Good. For us, we are going to go for the attribute way, so I do not need this code. I will delete it again. Bless you. Last but not least, we have to talk about the many-to-many relationship again. Because I told you that the book author table doesn't have a single primary key. It has a composite primary key, consisting of book ID and author ID. How do we handle that one? I will write the code, and probably I don't need to explain anything else because it's kind of self-explanatory. Modal builder, entity, book author, has key, but this time I'm not specifying a single property, but I'm saying I have a composite key consisting of book ID and author ID. This is how I specify a composite key. I cannot do that as an attribute. If I have a single property, which is the key for an entity, I can just add the key property. But in this case, I have a composite key, so I need to do it in the onModal creating function. Do you get the point? Understand it? Yeah? Good. Just one piece of information missing to give Entity Framework a little bit of a hint how it should model these many-to-many relationships. Now, as you can see here, the book author table, this one, has a foreign key. Let's scroll down a little bit so I can draw. It has a foreign key to book, it's this one, and it has a foreign key to author, it's this one. Unfortunately, Entity Framework is not smart enough to recognize this pattern automatically. We have to explicitly, in a many-to-many relationship, we have to explicitly tell Entity Framework that book author has exactly one book, and one book has many book author rows. Okay? And this can be done like that. I will again just write the code, and you can copy it in the future. I know it by heart, but at one point in the past I had to look it up in the documentation. It is not very difficult. It looks like this. Modal builder dot entity, you approach from the one side. So we start with the book and we work our way towards book author. So we say entity book has many authors, and then we work our way back from the book author to the book. So this time it has one book with one book. So what we essentially say here, we say a book has many authors and each author has exactly one book. Entity Framework is not smart enough to recognize that automatically. We have to tell it this. This is only true for many-to-many relationships. Okay? Recap. A book has many authors. An author has exactly one book. And of course, we need to do the same thing for the right part here. So we can copy these lines here, this one, and just say an author has many books and a book has exactly one author. Sorry, a book author has exactly one author. A book has many authors. So this is what you have to write. So in the future, for homeworks, for your matura, for your exam, you now have a kind of template that you can copy. And if you Google it, if you Google Entity Framework Core Many-to-Many Relationships, you also get the documentation at docs.microsoft.com. I told you before that at your Matura, you will not have access to your GitHub stuff. So therefore, if you didn't remember it by that time, you can take a look at docs.microsoft.com, but you need to know the terms for which you should Google. And the terms are Many-to-Many Relationship, Entity Framework Core. And then you will find the documentation. Okay? Good? Fine? Does it work? Please try to compile your application, build solution, and you should get no errors, no warnings. Everything should be fine. True? Good. So again, I know I bore you to death, but still I will recap it over and over again. We added the Nougat packages, we created the modal, we created the data context, and now migrations and database update. How do we do that? Well, I open a command shell in my project's home directory. So this is the directory where my csproj file lives. Okay? So please open a console where your csproj file lives. Have it? Good. Then we say, first take a look at the cheat sheet. At the bottom of the cheat sheet, you have the necessary statements, and we will need these two. .NET EF migrations add initial. This initial here at the end is an arbitrary name. You can give it any kind of name. It's just a name for the migration. If you later on change the database by, for instance, adding new properties or tables, you will add different migrations. And you should give meaningful names to these migrations. Initial is just my name for the first migration that I add. And now we will see whether you did anything wrong, because now the system will take a look at your code, try to understand it, and it will create the migrations. It will create the C# code that is necessary to bootstrap the database. So if everything is okay, you should see something like this. Succeeded. At least you shouldn't see any red text on the screen. And in your project, you now should have a folder which says migrations. So, does it work? Anybody needs support? Really? Does it work for everybody? I'm impressed. It's so easy to have a small typo or something like this, and then it immediately doesn't work. This is the statement. This one. .NET EF migrations add initial. So for those where it works, you can do the next step, and I will go through and help overcoming any problems. .NET database update. Oh, sorry, .NET EF database update. And if you do that one, and you did everything correctly, then inside, bless you, the bin debug net core app, you should now have here and here, you should now have a mydb.db. So add the migrations, database update, and that will result in a mydb.db. Okay, where can I help? Okay, while you are downloading the Visual Studio update, I would like to show you a cute little tool. It's called the SQLite database browser. Just Google it if you want to have it. It's a nice little Windows application. There are many UIs out there, but I prefer this one. Just say file, open file, and then specify the directory of the MyDB database, something like this. And then you have a nice little UI where you can take a look at all the tables, and you can explore the data, and you can run arbitrary SQL commands and things like that. Very useful tool. So if you work with SQLite, either for mobile computing or for Windows or Linux or whatever, a browser like that, a user interface like that is really useful. As I said, DB browser for SQLite, it works nicely, but there are many different UIs. Just Google it, I don't know, SQLite user interface or browser, and you will find many different options. At the end of the day, and this is the important thing that I want you to recognize, we don't have a heavyweight server like with SQL Server or Oracle. It's just a local file. That's it. Everything is stored in this local file. Okay? Good. A few days ago or weeks ago, I sent you an email because I created a walkthrough how you can publish something on Microsoft Azure App Service. And in this tutorial, I used the free tier of App Service. Okay? SQLite also has the big advantage that you can run it locally inside a web API in the free tier. So you get a free database server. It's not really a server, but you get a free relational database in your web API by adding SQLite. You don't have to pay for a SQL server. That's also a very nice thing. Okay? Good. Nice. You're updating, but everybody else is fine. So we will continue. Please follow along on the video beamer, and you have the whole code, so it's not a problem. Try to understand it, and as soon as you have it up to date, we can try to keep up. We can copy the whole solution from my GitHub repo and run it on your computer locally to make sure it runs. Okay, good. So next step, I would like to show you a few more advanced tricks for Entity Framework, which we haven't covered yet. For that, please create a new file, and let's call it fill database. Fill database. Now, just to recap a small feature of C#, we will create a so-called partial class. Take a look at the video beamer and then you can change your code accordingly. We can say static partial class, and do you know what this partial means? It means that the class is splitted up into multiple files. So we can easily take that one, the whole line, and copy it here. So now we have a single class split up into 1, 2 files. If you have very long classes, then it makes absolutely sense to split it up into multiple files. And for that, we use the partial keyword. Okay? So I would like you to create it like that. I would like to have a file fill database CS, but it still is the program class. This has nothing to do with Entity Framework. It is a pretty old C# feature, but still it is useful sometimes. Good? And then open the fill database CS. Here I would like you to add a new method. Let's say private static async task clean database async. Book data context. So something like this. And here we are going to delete all data from all tables. But I think now we have a break. I just heard the bell, so we will do a short break, and afterwards we'll continue exactly here, okay? So please don't delete what you have done so far. We will continue here in 15 minutes. See you there. We stopped here at clean database async. We want to write a little bit of code to delete all data from all tables. Please do not follow along. Do not write the code that I will write now, because the code is not good. I want to show a bad practice before we go into the correct practice, the best practice. A naive version of deleting all data could look something like this. It could say var books equals to context.books.toArray async, something like this. Of course, we need a using statement here and do an await. Don't write this code, as I told you, it's not good. For each var book in books, and we can go through it and we can just say context.books.remove book await context.save changes async. This code is not good because of many reasons. First reason, we are reading all the books from the database. Are we really interested in the books? No, we just want to delete them. Why should we read this data if we just want to get rid of it? The next thing is we are removing every single book, and after every single book we are sending a delete statement to the database. So if we have 10,000 books in our database, we communicate 10,000 times with our database. It will be horribly slow. So this is definitely not the way to go. In SQL, there is a much better way of deleting all data from a table. Can you remember? Delete from, for instance, books. That's all you need in SQL. So why can't we simply run this single SQL statement? Why can't we use the database to its full extent? And this is exactly what you can do with Entity Framework 2. So what you can essentially do, and now you can follow along, is you can say context.database.execute SQL raw async. If you don't have this method in IntelliSense, try to add this using statement up here first. Then you will get IntelliSense. And here all I have to do is I have to add the delete statement and add an await. And that's it. That's all I have to do. With database.execute SQL raw async and all the other raw statements that there are in Entity Framework, I can run any arbitrary SQL statement and send it to the database. So I can make use of all the features that the database offers. Typically, you're fine with Entity Framework. But sometimes when you have to deal with large amounts of data or with very specific features that you would like to use, then you have to go down to the bare metal, down to the real database and use everything that the database can offer. And the only thing to go really down to the database is by using these raw SQL statements. Understand it? Yep. Good. Of course, we don't get some compile time errors. So if we write something like this, so if we misspell the table name, the compiler will not give us an error. And therefore, it is better to use Entity Framework wherever possible. But sometimes, compromise must be taken, and in this case, it makes sense. So for us, we have 4 tables, so please do it as follows. Let's start with the book authors. Let's delete the books, let's delete the authors, and afterwards the genres. Something like this. Good? Makes sense? If you want to make it extra beautiful, you can do something like this. You don't need to remember that absolutely because, well, it's nice. You can use the name of feature of C#, and you can say, I want to add the name of, in this case, it's the class books. Sorry, you have to write advanced ef core dot. It's not books, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if it's better. You could write something like this. You see, the name of operator in C# gives you the name of the class or the name of the... Well, we can do the following. What do you think of book data context dot books? Not? Of course, context. This is good. This would be a nicer version. You see, now I don't have the table name hard-coded. So if I misspell something now, the compiler would tell me. See? This is especially beautiful. But if you write it like that, I'm perfectly fine with if you do that in the exam. I will keep it here just as an example. Good. Now, can you remember from databases that there was this thing called ACID? Atomic, consistency, and so on. Transactions. Can you remember from previous years? Yeah? Atomic means that you can send multiple statements to the database and tell the statements either execute all of them, or if somewhere something bad happens, a mistake, an error happens, roll back everything to a known well state. This is atomic transaction. And you can use transactions in Entity Framework too, and it works like that. This is a new topic that we are talking about here. We have never covered it before. If we want to use a transaction in Entity Framework, we say using var transaction equals to context.database.begin transaction async, and because it's async, we have to say await. And then we enclose the entire code that should be part of the transaction in curly braces, and at the end we say transaction dot commit async. This code now makes sure that either all delete statements have worked or not any data row has been deleted. So there is a rollback in case of any kind of error. Do you get the idea? Well, if you take a very close look, then Visual Studio tells us, hey Rainer, I have a tip for you, these small little dots here. If I put the cursor here at the dots, then I have this light bulb, Control dot is the shortcut, and then it tells me that there is a simple using statement. If I try that one, the code looks even nicer. See that one? I don't have any curly braces here. I just write using var transaction, and then I continue with the code, and at the end I say commit async. And now the entire code from here on is covered by the transaction until the end of the function. Get it? So it's a really nice sequence of statements without any curly braces and indentations disturbing the beauty of your code. Get the idea? So this is a transaction. Any questions so far? Directly in SQL you would say begin transaction and commit or rollback. Good. Now let's give it a try. Let's give it a try. Let's go into program. Make our main function async task because we have asynchronous code in it. And then create the database context using var context equals new book data context. Here it is. And then call our method await clean database async context. This is how your code should look like. Please remember, because we have an await statement, we need to make it async task. We have covered that many times now. And now comes the time of truth. You can run your application. Let's see if it works. I run my application, boom, and I get an error. I get an error here in SQLite, whatever. and it is somewhere I get here in clean database async, line 17. Let's see here, delete from, name of, I forgot name of, I'm sorry. I told you about it, but I didn't write it. My bad. Let's run it again. Much better. No errors anymore. So here, I'm sorry, I messed that up. Name of. As I told you, it's perfectly fine if you hard code books here. In real life, you would probably do something like this name of statement, but hey, we are just learning. Please run your application. The result isn't very impressive. You are deleting tables that are empty, so the only success indicator is that you don't get any errors. That should be the case. Does it work? Yes? Good. You have an error?
What books of was? A typo.
A typo, oh yeah. So, next we will need internet again. Do you have internet? Yes, you have? I don't. But I think I can fix that. Good, I'm back on the internet again. The next method, you don't have to write this method because I would like to spend a little bit more time talking about the code and debugging it. It doesn't make sense to write everything from scratch. So I ask you to do the following. I ask you to open my GitHub repository and please go into that folder. And inside the data folder here, you will find 3 JSON files. Please add them to your solution. The best way is, of course, to clone the repository or do a pull from the repository and just copy the data directory into your solutions. This should be how it looks like. See? Data, authors.json, books.json, and genre.json. Please add these files. It's just random stuff, random data that I created so that we can fill our database with a little bit of meaningful content. And if you have added all 3 files, please make sure to right-click properties on the files and change the setting copy to output directory to copy if newer. Okay? For these 3 files, we need the setting copy if newer so that we have the JSON files in the same folder as our executable. Make sense? Do you have it? Anybody needs more time? Good. Good. We don't need to talk about the JSON files in detail. Now we can go on and fill our database, and we will add a bunch of methods to our file filldatabase.cs. Please open filldatabase.cs, and in GitHub you will also find a filldatabase.cs. You see that one? And starting in line 30, you have a method which is called fill genre async. Please copy it. Fill genre async. If you have chosen the same names as I did, the method should just work. Probably you will have to add some usings. Oh yeah, and I have a typo here. It says context.genre.add. Of course, there should be plural. Context.genres.add. This is how it should look like. In our file, filldatabase.cs, we have this additional method that reads the JSON and nothing special here. Good? Now let's take a look at this code, and I would like to point out some specific things. First, again, I'm using a transaction. That means when I add the genres, if there is any kind of error, nothing will be added. There will be an automatical rollback if I don't commit the changes. Here you see that. But the point that I would add, the code that I would like to point out here is these few lines of code. Please note that I did not call save changes after each add. So I did not do the following. I did not do that. Add a genre, add. Add a genre, save. Add a genre, save. You shouldn't do that. Please always do it like this. Perform all the necessary changes in the database, and at the end, at the very end, you call save changes. Understand what I mean? Entity Framework will insert all records that you have changed. There is also a helper method. A student pointed that out today in the morning. Context.genres.add range, with which you could add multiple genres in a single line. But still, there are situations where you don't just want to add genres, but you want to add a book and a genre and an author and whatever. And my advice is always perform all the necessary changes and then save changes async once. Good? That makes your application a little bit faster. And Entity Framework is perfectly fine with that. Understand it? Good. Let's call it fill genre async. Go to program CS and call it await fill genre async context. Run the application, and hopefully I don't get an error. I don't. In my case, I have installed the SQLite database browser, so I can use this database browser and just, where is it? Here and open in File Explorer, bin, debug, netcore app, and somewhere here I have my mydb.db. Let's open it up. And if we are lucky and say, look into tables, yes, we are. Genres is filled. See? Good. It worked. If you don't have the database browser installed, that's no problem. If you don't see an error, everything is fine. So what have you learned from this example? Add, update, delete all the records that you want. At the end, call save changes. And use transactions if you want to use atomic transactions in Entity Framework. Good? Good. Nice. Next step. The next step, the next method is called fill books async, and I have prepared it again for you. So please, in GitHub, line 61 to 88, copy it into your code. And then we will take a look at the code, what I do here. What does this method do? This method adds a bunch of books to our database, and each book is assigned a random genre. it's just demo data, so random genre is perfectly fine. So what's the point here? It's really simple and it's really straightforward. So if I would run this application now, you don't need to run it now. I believe you that it really works. And if I take a look into the database, for instance here, and books and search, it's not there. Why isn't it there? Because I didn't call it. I'm sorry. I wrote the method, but I didn't call it. Await, fill, books, async, context. That is not the point that I want to make, but I just want to make sure that my code really works. So, and here you see books. The point that I want to make here is something else. Please try to follow along. We will now use the Visual Studio Debugger to take a look at the inner workings of Entity Framework. Please go to fill genre async. Go to line 39, something like this, the add statement, and set a breakpoint. Can you remember breakpoint F9 or pressing here in the gray area? And set a second breakpoint here after reading the genres. Line 64 is that. After this statement. Okay? 2 breakpoints. Got it? Please don't make the same mistake as I did. Add the fill books async to your program CS. Don't forget that one. I forgot it, so don't make the same mistake. Once you have done that, please start the application using the debugger. So just the green play icon here, or press F5 for running debugger. And the system should break here in fill genre. Let's take a look at the genre. It's drama. Good. So we add the genre drama. Please note that the genre here is a local variable. It comes from this collection, which is also a local variable. This is no global variable, no static variable, nothing like this. It's just a local variable. Let's remember this genre. Let's do the following. Please take a look at the video beamer and then execute the same steps. Hover over G, right-click here on the class name, and then select Make Object ID. We discussed Make Object ID before, I think, when we talked about the debugging features. And if you hover over G again, it should now have this $1 here at the side. See that one? Okay, remove the breakpoint, F9, or click here in the gray area, and let it run until we reach the next breakpoint. And now comes the important part. Please listen closely. This is important. Now we are in a different method, fill books async. Again, we have genres, as you can see it here. Local variable, no global variable, nothing like that. But if we hover over the genre collection and if we open it up, you will see that we get exactly the same C# object back in index 0. Get the idea? So somebody somewhere must have magically tracked our genre and somebody has recognized that the genre that we inserted a few milliseconds before is the same genre that we just read from the database and gave us exactly the same object reference, the same point in memory. And this is what Entity Framework really does. Entity Framework performs so-called tracked reading. So whenever it reads or writes data to the database, it remembers every single object that it ever read from the database or has written to the database. And if you read the same, if you access the same object again with the same primary key, you will get the same object. I mean identity. Not just a copy, you will get the same object. Understand what I mean? This is crucial for understanding Entity Framework. It keeps track of all objects it ever wrote to the database or read from the database. When will it lose this cache? Well, whenever you create a new context, something like this, it has its own tracking. So if you do not want to have long-term tracking, you have to create a separate data context. Understand what I mean? Yeah? Maybe you are not perfectly sure why this is really useful, but believe me, once you write more complex applications, you will remember this fact and you will be able to use it. You will be able to exploit this inner working of Entity Framework. Good. Let it run until the end and it should fill the database with genres and books. Understand what I mean? Tracking. By the way, if you are really interested in optimization, if you read data from the database and you absolutely know that you will not need tracking, then you can say as no tracking. Okay? This is possible. It is a possible optimization if you are just reading database, and if you know that you don't want to have tracking, then you can disable tracking. But if you are unsure, especially now that you are a beginner and you're just learning, forget about what I just said, just use it this way, and in most of the cases you will be fine. Okay? This is really an advanced topic. Advanced optimization, we don't need it currently for this course. But now you've heard it. Good? Nice. Now we have books. Books and genres. Let's go the next step. We need to fill the authors. Please copy the last method in this file. It's starting in line 90 and it's called fill authors async. And then again, we are going to take a look at the code. The special feature in this function here has to do with the fact that each author is assigned a random book. So we want to fill the database with the random demo data. So we just make it up that every author should have written exactly one book, a random one. Okay? I just specified that. Why not? And now let's take a look at how this is done. First, we create the new author. The data of the author is read from the JSON file. Then we create the assignment of the author to the book. And please note that the author references the object that we created up here. And last but not least, we add the assignment of the author to the book, and we reference the object here. The important thing is that we never ever call add for this author. We just add the book author, and the book author references the author, and that's fine. With Entity Framework, you do not need to add every single object. If you have a tree of objects, think of I don't know, you are ordering some stuff at Amazon, for instance. Then you have an order. The order has multiple order lines because you order, I don't know, an album, a music album and a book, for instance. Multiple order lines and invoicing details and shipment details. The only thing that you need to do for Entity Framework to be happy is you need to add the top level object. In my case, or in the case with Amazon, just the order. And the details and the shipment details and everything is inserted automatically as long as you are referencing it from the order. Get the idea? You do not need to add every single object. Just one is perfectly fine. Entity Framework will then take a look into the object and look up all the related data, in our case the author, and inserted it too. In the correct order, you don't need to think about it. Entity Framework will figure out the order of the insert statement and it will just work. This is really useful. Good? In SQL, you would have to write a single insert statement for each row, and you would have to manually make sure that the insert statements are in the correct order. This is not necessary here. So let's give it a try. If you have copied this code, let it run. Hopefully we don't get an error. I didn't get one. And in my case, I can take a look at the browser here and look in authors, for instance. Again, I did it again. I forgot to call the method. Fill author async. I'm sorry for that. Let's try it again. Good. And check it. Authors, yes. Now I have 20 authors available. And if I'm lucky, every author should have assigned a random book. Yes, we have 20 books. That's fine. Does it work? Anybody need support? Good, very good. Any questions so far? Let's quickly recap what we have learned. And let me point out what is really important for your exam and what is, advanced stuff that is interesting but not that important. Important for your exam is the fact that you can run raw SQL queries. Please remember context.database.execute SQL raw. You now have a template. Copy it from here if you are unsure. The next thing that we have learned that is new is how to use transactions. This one. Begin transaction, commit. The next thing that we have learned is tracking queries. I showed you that if you read a record multiple times, you always get the same object. And last but not least, we talked about how often we should call save changes async at the end once we are done. And I told you that it's enough to add the top level object to Entity Framework, and Entity Framework will figure out how to insert the entire object graph into the database. Good? Fine? Good. Nice. Next, we are going to take a look at more advanced query scenarios. Okay? So please add a new file, add class, and this time I'm going to call it query database. Query database. Just like before, it will again be part of our partial class. So what I do is, again, I copy this part, so we are still in the class program. So please make sure that your query database is also part of the partial class program. Fine? Good. Let's write a little bit of code. Let me quickly look up how I called it. Private static async task IEnumerable book. So we will give back a list of books, query books with genres, book data context, context. This is how it should look like. Okay? I want to write a method at the end of the day that reads the book with all the genres. Every book has one and exactly one genre, if you can remember that. So please do not follow along. I will now write code that is absolutely unnecessary, but I just want to show you how you shouldn't do it. And afterwards, I show you how you should do it. I can easily query for all the books, okay? Var books equals to context.books dot to array async. Something like this. We know how to do that. Oops. Good. And then I could say for each var book in books book dot, wait, of course, sorry. Book dot genre equals to await context dot genre dot first genre.id equals book.genre.id. I could do something like this. So I can iterate over all the books, and for every book I can read the genre, and at the end I will give back the books. You understand what this method does? Read all books, and then for each book read the genres. And this is absolutely not the way you should do it, because Entity Framework can do this entirely for you. You can delete everything and just write dot include book genre. Done. That's all. Nice, isn't it? Include means that it automatically reads all the connected genres. I typically write it a little bit different. I write it something like this. I like this syntax more. Something like this. But yeah, that's kind of personal style. Depends what you like. Let's give it a try. Let's go into program CS. Read it. Var books equals to query books with genres, context, and just set a breakpoint. Oh, sorry, a wait, of course. And then set a breakpoint here. See, here at the last closing curly braces, I set a breakpoint. At the closing curly braces, I set a breakpoint. Then I run the entire application. It should break at the end. And we can take a look into books. Here. And if we open one book, see, genre is filled. If we open it up, we see this is a horror book. Got the idea? This is what include does for you. Technically, it will be a select statement with an inner or left join. Fine? So please remember, include. Next one. You can copy this line because we will again return some books, and let's call it query filtered books async. Oh, just to make sure. You see, query filtered books with genre, I forgot the async postfix here. It's a good practice that every method that returns a task is called async. So I will fix this one. I will press F2 and add async at the end. It's not an absolute must, but it is considered good practice. So here, I would like to return all English books, or all US books, I think it's in the database, all US books from genre drama. This is what I want to do. Good? And now we'll write a little bit of code, but it will look a little bit different as you might suspect it, as you might expect it. Var filtered books equals to context.books.where book I'm using system LINQ. Book genre, genre title equals drama. Please note that I do not add to array async here. I do not add to array async. I will complete the code now, and then we'll talk about what's going on. Next thing is I say return filtered books dot where book dot language US. And now I say to array async, and I say await. Now let's talk about what's going on here. I'll wait until everybody has written down the statements. The technique that we use here is called deferred execution. Deferred execution, to defer means, I think, verzögern, hinauszögern. Deferred execution means that in this line, no SQL statement is sent to the database. Because we don't have a to-array async, nothing like this, this line will not be sent to the database. It's just a part of the query. We just say, okay, all books with genre drama, let's call them filtered books. And later on, we can add additional where clauses. You see it here? And somewhere at the very end, we call to-array async. We can make it even more impressive by saying filtered books equals to something like this, and then say return await filtered books dot to array async, something like this. So we can step by step build the query in a helper variable, and at the very end we send one SQL statement to the database. Get the idea? This is sometimes very useful because sometimes, well, in our case, it's really trivial because we have 1-2 lines directly beneath each other. But sometimes you're writing a more complex application with many modules, and the modules can cooperate. They can say, okay, I would like to add a little bit of filtering. And the other module can say, okay, I would like to add additional filtering. One module, for instance, can do some security-related filtering. I only allow the user to access customers from Austria. And the second module will maybe add some filtering based on customer types or whatever. The point is that we are sending the query at the very end to the database, and everything else is combined. The execution is deferred until we call to array async. Understand what I mean? This is a very, very powerful concept of entity framework. Good? Clear? Okay? Nice. So let me quickly check how we're doing time. Yeah. We have 4 minutes left. Good. In my GitHub repository, I would have final thing here, this one. I will not cover it now. It's really not very important. It is not relevant for your tests or for your Matura. Maybe we'll take a look in the second block before we go into Xamarin. The idea of this lesson was to show you more advanced topics of Entity Framework. Are we done? Is this all that Entity Framework can do? No, Entity Framework can do a lot more than what you have seen now. But this is no longer hello world, this is no longer trivial. This gives you an idea of how powerful Entity Framework is behind the scenes. And to give you a little bit more context, the code that we have written here can now be run on any platform. It works on Linux, it works on Windows, it works on macOS, and it works on iOS, and it works on Android without any changes. Because we decided to go for SQLite, we have written data access code that is really portable and runs everywhere with a good performance. That's the beauty of a language like C# that runs everywhere. For instance, in the other class today, we had a lightning talk about Swift UI. Swift UI is a great technology for building iOS apps. But if you write the code in Swift UI, you can run it simply on iOS and Mac and nowhere else. It's a good platform, but it's not cross-platform. And this is the big drawback or advantage. It's really using the platform to the very, very highest degree, but on the other hand, it's only one platform. This code is now portable. Get the idea? Good. So, please remember the things that we discussed today. I think we had one homework until today, and you have a second homework until next week, so I don't need to give you anything here. I heard that you didn't take a look at my video that I gave you for the cover lesson last week. At least you didn't take a look here in the class, I think. I have to give you that as a homework for next week. It's just 40 minutes, something like this. You will find some time, maybe in the bus or on the train when you go home. There are really important tips there, which are, and now listen closely, super relevant for your Matura. Okay? So don't miss that video. I will not cover it here in class. This is why I created it. You can take a look at it. Maybe you can survive without it, but believe me, it will save you a lot of time. Did anybody take a look at? Yeah. Did you also use the scaffolding by creating the controllers and so on? Really useful, right? It saves you a lot of time because once you have the data context, you just make 3 clicks and the web API is done. You don't need to write a single line of code. So that is really important. Please take a look at it. I will note it down in Webuntis for you. So for now, we are done, and we see each other after a break, I think in 2 hours, and then the topic will be Xamarin. We will really write some mobile apps today, okay?